When a new CFO suddenly cut my department's budget by 40% without warning, I knew something was wrong. Behind those pristine spreadsheets and quarterly projections, I discovered hidden bonuses, ghost contracts, and internal emails that could destroy a perfectly polished career. This time, the man who slashed my resources would pay with the very executive chair he so proudly occupied. My name is Vanessa Evans, and for 15 years, I've been the senior financial analyst at Trilune Capital, a private equity firm where numbers tell stories that most people prefer to ignore. At 38, I've outlasted 3 CEOs, 5 restructurings, and countless promises of streamlined operations. I've survived because I understand something fundamental in finance. The real power lies not in making money, but in knowing where it goes. My office on the 14th floor overlooks Manhattan's financial district, a view I earned through years of meticulous work. Every morning, I arrive at 6:30 a.m., an hour before the earliest traders, 2 hours before the executives. This quiet time is when I do my real work, running custom macros through our financial systems, cross-referencing transactions that others assume are routine. I maintain 3 levels of documentation. First, the official reports that go to management, sanitized and formatted according to corporate guidelines. Second, my enhanced analyses stored on encrypted drives, showing patterns and anomalies that might raise uncomfortable questions. Third, and most important, my handwritten ledger. A simple black notebook where I record discrepancies that don't quite warrant investigation but feel wrong in that particular way that only decades of experience can detect. Everything changed when Stephen Rollins arrived. Harvard MBA, 10 years at McKenna Consulting, a reputation for aggressive cost optimization. The board introduced him as our new CFO with the usual fanfare, champagne reception in the 42nd floor conference room, speeches about taking Trilune to the next level. I watched him work the room, designer suit impeccable, handshake firm but not aggressive, laugh perfectly timed. When he reached me, his smile never touched his eyes. Vanessa Evans. He read from my name tag, though I suspected he'd already memorized the entire organizational chart. Senior Financial Analyst, I look forward to reviewing your department's resource allocation. 3 weeks later, the email arrived at 4:47 p.m. on a Friday. Budget cuts, effective immediately, 40% reduction in operational expenses, 50% cut in headcount, all analytical software subscriptions under review. The reasoning was wrapped in corporate speak about efficiency and synergy, but the message was clear: my department was being gutted. My colleagues panicked. Sarah from Risk Assessment started updating her resume that afternoon. Marcus, who'd been with the company for 8 years, spent the weekend calling recruiters. The younger analysts whispered in the break room about finding new jobs before the axe fell. I did none of these things. Instead, I smiled, a cold expression that I'd perfected over years of corporate warfare. I saved the email, printed a hard copy for my files, and began to plan. Because Stephen Rollins had made a crucial mistake. He'd assumed I was just another analyst, another line item to be optimized away. He didn't know about my black notebook. He didn't know about the patterns I'd been tracking for years. Most importantly, he didn't know that I'd survived this long by understanding a simple truth in corporate finance. Everyone has secrets, and the key to survival is knowing which ones to expose and when. That weekend, while my colleagues updated their LinkedIn profiles, I began my investigation. Every predator has a pattern, and Stephen Rollins would be no exception. The only question was how deep I'd need to dig to find it. The first rule of financial investigation is patience. Amateurs rush in, looking for obvious fraud, blatant theft, smoking guns. Professionals understand that the real crimes hide in plain sight, disguised as legitimate transactions, buried in the endless flow of corporate money. I began with what I knew. Trilune Capital managed $2.8 billion in assets, spread across 14 funds. Money moved constantly: investments, returns, management fees, operational costs. In that churning sea of transactions, irregularities could easily disappear. But I had advantages. 15 years of access meant I knew our systems better than IT. More importantly, I'd written many of our analytical tools myself, including several macros that our current staff used without understanding their full capabilities. On my third morning of investigation, arriving at 5:45 a.m. to ensure complete privacy, I activated one of these tools, a tracking macro I'd embedded years ago. Officially, it monitored transaction efficiency. Unofficially, it could trace any movement of funds through our entire system, including deleted records. The coffee grew cold as I worked, following money trails through our labyrinthine corporate structure. At first, everything seemed normal: operational expenses, salaries, standard investment movements. Then I noticed something odd in the reserve funds. Every company maintains reserves, money set aside for emergencies, unexpected opportunities, or regulatory requirements. Triloon's reserves sat at a healthy $340 million, distributed across several accounts, but the balances were shifting. Small amounts, $50,000 here, $75,000 there, moving from the reserves to a holding account I'd never seen before. I pulled up the account details. Created 6 weeks ago, 2 weeks after Stephen arrived, authorized by the CFO's office. Naturally, the stated purpose was operational efficiency optimization, which could mean anything or nothing. More interesting was where the money went next. The holding account didn't retain funds. It passed them through to an offshore entity registered in the Cayman Islands. The company name was Bland, Financial Solutions International. But the timing was suspicious. I cross-referenced the transfers with our executive calendar. Every movement coincided with Stephen's strategic planning sessions, meetings that appeared on his schedule but included no other attendees and generated no minutes. By noon, I'd identified 12 transfers totaling $1.8 million. Each amount fell just below the threshold requiring board notification. Each transfer was technically legal, authorized by someone with appropriate credentials. But together, they painted a picture of systematic extraction. The question was extraction for what purpose. I turned to our compensation records. Executive bonuses at Triloon were generous but transparent, or so we claimed. Base salaries were public within the company. Bonuses tied to performance metrics, everything approved by the compensation committee. But Stephen had added a new category to the executive compensation structure: special administrative incentives. The description was vague enough to be meaningless. The amounts curiously aligned with those offshore transfers. I leaned back in my chair, studying the pattern on my screen. This wasn't simple theft. Stephen was too smart for that. This was something more sophisticated, a way to enhance executive compensation while maintaining plausible deniability. The board would see only the official bonuses. The offshore funds would flow back through some mechanism I hadn't yet identified. Perfectly legal, perfectly hidden. Unless someone knew where to look. Unless someone had been tracking financial patterns for 15 years and recognized the signature of corporate greed disguised as financial innovation. I made careful notes in my black ledger, documenting dates, amounts, account numbers. Then I did something I'd never done before in 15 years at Triloon. I created a hidden partition on my workstation and began building a shadow database, a complete record of every suspicious transaction, because I realized something had changed. This wasn't just about protecting my department anymore. Stephen Rollins represented something darker, the kind of executive who hollowed out companies from within, extracting value while preaching efficiency. He'd targeted my team because we were the ones most likely to notice his schemes. He'd made us the enemy. That was his second mistake. The atmosphere at Triloon shifted like weather before a storm. You could feel it in the way conversations died when certain people entered rooms. How the Slack channels that once buzzed with collegial chatter grew quiet and functional. Fear has a particular quality in corporate environments, sterile and suffocating, like slowly running out of air in a sealed room. My access to internal systems began mysteriously failing. First, I was dropped from the senior analyst Slack channel, a technical glitch that a T couldn't seem to resolve. Then my credentials for the executive financial dashboard expired without warning. Each incident was explained away, apologized for, but never quite fixed. I adapted, as I always had. What they didn't realize was that 15 years at a company creates redundancies. I had backup access through legacy systems that predated Stephen's arrival, old protocols that IT had forgotten to disable. More valuable still were the relationships, the administrative assistants who remembered when I'd helped them understand their stock options, the IT technicians who appreciated that I never talked down to them. It was Marjorie. executive assistant to the CEO, who provided the breakthrough. We'd known each other since she started as a receptionist 12 years ago. She found me in the parking garage one evening, both of us theoretically heading home after another late night. "The new CFO's been asking about you," she said, checking over her shoulder with practiced casualness, "wanting to know about your access levels, your project history, very interested in your analytical methods." I kept my expression neutral. "I suppose that's natural. He's reviewing all departments." She gave me a look that said she wasn't buying it. "There's going to be another round of cuts. I've seen the draft memo. Your name's on it. Vanessa." "I appreciate the warning. There's something else." She glanced around again, then pressed a USB drive into my hand. "Email backups from the executive server, from before they upgraded the security protocols last month. I thought you might find them interesting." Marjorie walked away before I could respond, her heels clicking efficiently on the concrete. I waited 10 minutes before leaving, the USB drive burning in my pocket like a coal. At home, on an air-gapped laptop I kept for sensitive work, I explored Marjorie's gift. The email archives went back 3 months, covering Stephen's hiring process and early days at Trilune. Most were routine, discussions of strategy, meeting schedules, corporate platitudes, but buried in the correspondence were threads that made my pulse quicken. Stephen hadn't come to Trilune alone. He'd brought a shadow network, consultants from his previous firm who were now being hired for special projects. The contracts were all short-term, high value, for services described in language so vague it could mean anything: management consulting, strategic advisory, operational optimization. More telling were the email recipients. Each consultant contract was copied to the same Cayman Islands entity I'd identified in the fund transfers. The circle was closing. I found one email particularly illuminating, sent from Stephen to someone identified only as RT at a private equity firm in Connecticut. Phase 1 proceeding as discussed. Resistance minimal. Financial analytics department will be restructured within 60 days, eliminating primary oversight capacity. Bonus structure implementation on schedule. Expect first distributions Q3. My hands stilled on the keyboard. This wasn't just about hidden bonuses. This was a systematic plan to eliminate internal oversight while implementing a shadow compensation system. And I wasn't just collateral damage, I was a specific target. The next morning, I arrived to find my office door locked, facilities claiming another administrative error while waiting for security to provide access. I noticed Stephen in the glass-walled conference room, presenting to the board. Charts showed dramatic cost savings from the proposed restructuring. Heads nodded appreciatively. When I finally entered my office, several things were subtly wrong. Files had been moved, drawers opened and imperfectly closed. They'd been searching for something. My black ledger, perhaps, safely hidden in my home safe, or evidence of my investigation, stored on encrypted drives they'd never find. I sat at my desk and opened my official email. A new message waited, from Stephen himself, requesting a comprehensive audit of all analytical processes my department had implemented over the past 5 years. Due date 1 week. The kind of make-work project designed to keep me busy while they finalized my termination. I smiled, that same cold expression I'd perfected over years of corporate survival. They wanted me to document my processes. I'd give them documentation, but I'd also give them something else. A careful trap woven into the very analysis they'd requested. Because Stephen had made his third mistake, he'd left an email trail in corporate America. That was like leaving DNA at a crime scene. Financial fraud is like a magic trick performed in reverse. The audience sees money disappear, but the real artistry lies in making it reappear somewhere else, transformed and laundered through enough steps to confuse any casual observer. Stephen's scheme was elegant in its complexity. But every magic trick has its method, and I was determined to document each sleight of hand. My investigation shifted to the physical realm. Digital records could be altered, deleted, explained away. But corporations still generated paper. Contracts that required wet signatures, invoices that needed physical approval. These documents lived in filing systems that predated Stephen's arrival, in storage rooms that executives rarely visited. I began my search during lunch hours, when the administrative floors emptied. My senior analyst credentials still opened most doors, and where they didn't, 15 years of relationship building provided alternatives. The facilities manager, Thomas, owed me a favor from when I'd helped his daughter understand compound interest for her college finance class. He didn't ask questions when I requested access to the contract storage room. The space smelled of old paper and toner, filing cabinets stretching in rows like library stacks. I started with the most recent contracts, working backwards from Stephen's start date. Most were legitimate, standard vendor agreements, employment contracts, service providers. But scattered among them were the anomalies, ghost contracts. I called them, agreements for consulting services that no one could quite define, signed by Stephen, but witnessed by no one from legal or procurement. The amounts varied but stayed just under the thresholds requiring additional approval. The vendors were all different on paper but shared suspicious similarities. The same boilerplate language, the same payment terms, the same destination for funds. I photographed each contract with a digital camera I'd purchased specifically for this purpose, never connected to any network. The images stored on memory cards I kept in a safety deposit box across town. The pattern became clearer with each document. Stephen was running a classic kickback scheme, disguised as consulting fees. The consultants were shells, the services non-existent, the money flowing out and back in ways that would take a forensic accountant months to unravel. Unless that forensic accountant had been watching from the inside for 15 years, the breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Hidden among legitimate contracts was a draft agreement, never executed, but revealing in its details. It outlined a performance bonus structure for senior executives, tied not to company performance, but to cost reduction initiatives. The more departments cut, the more executives earned. My department's destruction would net Stephen a cool $400,000 in performance incentives. But the draft went further. It outlined Phase 2, the systematic dismantling of all internal audit functions, replaced by external consultants who would report directly to the CFO. No more oversight, no more questions, no more Vanessa Evans noticing patterns in the data. I spent 3 hours in that storage room, methodically documenting the paper trail. By the time I finished, I had enough evidence to suggest a pattern of financial manipulation that would make any board nervous, but suggestion wasn't enough. I needed proof, clear and incontrovertible, the kind that would stand up in a boardroom confrontation or a court of law. That evening, I worked late, officially completing Stephen's busy work audit while actually constructing something far more dangerous. Using the contract information, I built a financial model showing the flow of funds from Triloon to the Shell consultants and back to offshore accounts. The model was speculative in places, but the pattern was damning. More importantly, I began laying my trap. The audit Stephen had requested would include several recommendations for improved financial controls. Hidden within those recommendations were specific triggers, processes that would flag any unusual transfers or bonus payments for automatic board notification. If implemented, they would expose Stephen's entire scheme. Of course, he would never approve such controls, but that rejection itself would be revealing. A CFO refusing basic financial safeguards. Sometimes the most damaging evidence is what people refuse to do. As I prepared to leave that night, I noticed Stephen's office light still on. Through the glass, I could see him on a conference call, gesturing animatedly. On his desk, spread out like war plans, were organizational charts with red marks through various departments. Mine was circled in black. I thought of Sun Tzu. All warfare is based on deception. Stephen thought he was the only one fighting a war. He was wrong. I stopped by my office one last time, retrieving a few personal items. Nothing that would suggest I was preparing for what came next. But hidden in the lining of my briefcase was a flash drive containing everything: contracts, emails, financial models, a complete dossier on Stephen Rollins and his shadow network. Tomorrow, I would submit my audit as requested, and then I would wait, because the best trap is the one your enemy walks into willingly. Convinced of their own superiority, Stephen had made his fourth mistake. He'd given me time to prepare. The art of corporate sabotage lies not in direct confrontation, but in creating conditions where your target destroys themselves. I submitted my audit report at exactly 9:00 a.m. on the deadline date, a comprehensive document that was both completely accurate and devastatingly deceptive. On the surface, it was everything Stephen had requested: a detailed analysis of our financial tracking systems, complete with process flows, system dependencies, and efficiency metrics. I'd even included recommendations for cost savings, knowing he'd appreciate the gesture. But woven throughout were subtle poison pills, suggestions that seemed benign but would trigger cascading revelations if implemented. For example, I recommended consolidating our vendor payment systems to reduce processing costs. Reasonable enough, except the consolidation would automatically flag any vendor receiving payments above certain thresholds or with suspicious payment patterns. Stephen's ghost consultants would light up like Christmas trees. Another suggestion involved implementing automated board reporting for any transfers from reserve funds. I framed it as transparency and good governance. Buzzwords Stephen couldn't openly oppose, but it would expose his entire offshore transfer scheme within days of implementation. The masterpiece was my proposal for a executive performance dashboard, a real-time system showing how cost-cutting initiatives translated to company value. I'd helpfully included a prototype that pulled historical data, demonstrating how past cost reductions had impacted overall performance. What I didn't mention was that the system also tracked executive bonuses against those cuts, creating a clear correlation between department destruction and personal enrichment. Stephen's response came within hours. A meeting request. Just the two of us. In his corner office, I arrived precisely on time, professional in my charcoal suit, carrying nothing but a leather portfolio. His office was a shrine to corporate power, awards from his consulting days, photos with industry titans, a putting green in the corner. He didn't rise when I entered. A calculated power move. "Vanessa," he said, gesturing to a chair positioned to make me look up at him. "Thank you for the thorough report. Very comprehensive." "I aim to be thorough," I replied, sitting with practiced poise. He leaned back, studying me. "Some of your recommendations are interesting. Others seem unnecessarily complex. This automated board reporting, for instance. Surely that would just create noise for directors who already trust our judgment." "Transparency builds trust," I said mildly. "Several Fortune 500 companies have implemented similar systems. McKenna Consulting published a white paper on it last year." His eye twitched at the mention of his former firm. "I'm familiar with the paper. Theoretical best practices don't always translate to practical reality. Of course, these are just recommendations. You asked for a comprehensive review." "Indeed I did." He stood, moving to the window, a classic intimidation technique. "I'm more interested in your analysis of current systems. You've identified several inefficiencies. 15 years of experience provides perspective." 15 years, he repeated. "That's a long time in one role. Some might say too long. Fresh perspectives have value. As do institutional knowledge and deep understanding of complex systems." He turned back to me, smile sharp. "I'm implementing a new organizational structure. Your role will be changing. Fewer analytical responsibilities. More focus on documentation and knowledge transfer. To preserve that institutional knowledge you mentioned. A demotion disguised as reorganization. I'd expected this." "I see. And my team. Transition to roles better suited to our new efficiency model. Some may find opportunities elsewhere. Natural evolution." "Naturally," I agreed, keeping my voice neutral. "When does this new structure take effect?" "End of the quarter. 3 weeks. I trust that's sufficient time to document your processes and train your replacement." "More than sufficient," I said, standing. "Will there be anything else?" He studied me, perhaps surprised by my easy acquiescence. "You're taking this well." "I'm a realist, Mr. Rollins. Markets change. Companies adapt. Employees adjust or move on." "Exactly." His smile widened, mistaking my calm for defeat. "I'm glad we understand each other." I left his office without looking back. 3 weeks. He'd given me 3 weeks to document everything, train my replacement, essentially hand over the keys to someone who wouldn't know what to look for, wouldn't see the patterns, wouldn't notice the money flowing into shadows. What Stephen didn't realize was that 3 weeks was more than enough time. My trap was already set. The audit report contained everything needed to destroy him, hidden in plain sight among efficiency metrics and cost-saving proposals. All I needed was the right trigger. That trigger came from an unexpected source. The quarterly board meeting was scheduled for the second week of my transition period. Routine financial reviews, nothing that should concern a soon-to-be former senior analyst, except this quarter included an external audit, required by our investors. And external auditors had a tendency to ask uncomfortable questions about unusual recommendations in internal reports. I spent the next week being extraordinarily helpful. I documented everything, created training materials, answered every question with professional grace. I was the model of a cooperative employee managing transition. No one suspected that every piece of documentation I created included subtle references to the anomalies I discovered, breadcrumbs that any competent auditor would follow. The beauty of the trap was its inevitability. Stephen could suppress my recommendations, sideline my concerns, eliminate my position, but he couldn't stop external auditors from doing their job. And when they started pulling threads, the entire tapestry would unravel. I allowed myself one small satisfaction. In my transition documentation, I included a section on vendor management best practices. Buried on page 47 was a simple note: see Appendix J for unusual payment patterns requiring investigation. Appendix J, of course, contained a detailed analysis of every ghost consultant, every offshore transfer, every hidden bonus. Stephen had made his fifth mistake. He'd told me to document everything. 3 days before the board meeting, I sat in the 42nd floor conference room, presenting my transition report to the senior leadership team. Stephen presided from the head of the table, satisfied smile playing at his lips as I detailed how my responsibilities would be distributed among remaining staff and new hires. As you can see, I concluded, laser pointer steady on the final slide. All critical processes have been documented and transferred. The analytical functions will continue without interruption. Excellent work, Vanessa, the CEO said, though his eyes held questions. Your professionalism during this transition has been exemplary. Thank you. I've also prepared supplementary materials for the external auditors. They requested historical data for their quarterly review. Stephen's smile faltered slightly. What kind of historical data? Standard analytical reports, vendor payments, fund transfers. They were particularly interested in our new efficiency initiatives and their financial impact. I kept my tone bland, helpful. I've compiled everything into a comprehensive package. It's already been submitted to ensure they have adequate review time. Submitted? Stephen leaned forward. All audit materials should go through my office. Of course, I copied you on the submission email. I had, technically, to an email address 1 character off from his real one, an easy typo that would bounce back after the auditors had already received the files. I wanted to ensure we met their deadline. The room tensed slightly. Missing auditor deadlines was serious, and Stephen couldn't object without seeming obstructive. Very thorough, he said finally, but his jaw was tight. The meeting concluded with handshakes and hollow wishes for my future success. I returned to my nearly empty office, personal items already boxed, walls bare except for the fading rectangles where frames once hung. Only one task remained. That evening, I worked late one final time. The building emptied around me, leaving only the cleaning crew and security guards. At 9:47 p.m., I sent a single email to Margaret Chen, the lead external auditor. The subject line was innocuous: additional financial analysis per your request. The email contained no accusations, no inflammatory language, just a simple note. As discussed, please find attached the complete analytical framework for executive compensation and vendor management. Particular attention should be paid to correlations between cost reduction initiatives and performance bonuses, as well as vendor payment patterns highlighted in Appendix J. Please let me know if you need any clarification before my transition completes this Friday. I hadn't discussed anything with Margaret Chen, but she would assume she'd forgotten a conversation, would open the attachments to refresh her memory, and once she did, once she saw the patterns laid out with mathematical precision, she would have no choice but to investigate. The next morning, I arrived to find unusual activity on the executive floor. Stephen's assistant looked harried, ferrying documents to his office. Through the glass walls, I could see him on multiple phone calls, gesturing sharply. By lunch, legal had joined him, then the head of compliance. I continued my transition duties, serene as a lake, while the storm gathered above. That afternoon, Margaret Chen called my direct line. Vanessa, this analysis you sent, these patterns. Yes. They're concerning, deeply concerning. Can you walk me through your methodology? Of course. Though I should mention I'm transitioning out of my role this week, Mr. Rollins has restructured my position. Silence on the other end. Then, I see. How convenient. Can you come to our offices tomorrow? Bring any supporting documentation. Absolutely. I spent that night preparing my final presentation, not for Triloon's board, but for the external auditors who had the power to demand answers. Stephen couldn't deflect. My black ledger came out of its hiding place, its handwritten notes cross-referenced with digital records, contract photos, and email archives. The story it told was damning in its completeness. A CFO who'd systematically enriched himself and his network while gutting the very departments meant to provide oversight. Hidden bonuses tied to destruction. Ghost consultants feeding offshore accounts. A deliberate plan to eliminate anyone who might notice. I organized it all into a presentation that would make any auditor's blood run cold. Clean, precise, undeniable. The kind of evidence that triggered formal investigations, SEC involvement, criminal charges. My phone buzzed with a text from Marjorie. Emergency board meeting tomorrow. Stephen's trying to get ahead of something. Thought you should know. I smiled. That cold expression I'd perfected. Stephen was about to learn the final lesson of corporate warfare when you strike at someone. Make sure they don't survive to strike back. He'd cut my budget, targeted my team, tried to silence 15 years of expertise, but he'd forgotten that in finance, numbers never lie. They just wait for someone with the patience and skill to make them tell the truth. Tomorrow, in a bland conference room in an auditor's office, I would tell that truth. And Stephen Rollins would learn what happened when you tried to bury someone who knew where all the bodies were hidden. He'd made his final mistake. He'd left me alive. The morning of reckoning arrived wrapped in typical Manhattan chaos sirens. Construction. The pulse of 8 million people pretending yesterday's crimes didn't matter. But on the 42nd floor of Triloon Capital, yesterday's crimes were about to demand payment. I dressed carefully that morning. Navy suit, crisp white blouse, the pearl earrings my grandmother left me, professional armor for a professional execution. My presentation materials were backed up in triplicate, one copy for the auditors, one secured in my safety deposit box, one with my attorney. 15 years of corporate survival had taught me redundancy. The auditors' offices occupied a sterile building in Midtown, all glass and steel, and the kind of aggressive air conditioning that reminded you money was being counted here. Margaret Chen met me in the lobby, her expression carefully neutral, but her eyes sharp with the hunger of someone who'd found something rotten. Thank you for coming, Vanessa. We have several partners joining us. This is significant. The conference room held 5 auditors, 2 SEC representatives who'd materialized overnight, and a court reporter. I laid out my evidence methodically, walking them through each transaction, each ghost contract, each hidden bonus. The room grew quieter with each revelation, the kind of silence that precedes institutional thunder. This Cayman entity, one SEC representative interrupted. Financial Solutions International. You're certain it links back to Mr. Rollins. I produced the email threads, the contract signatures, the payment patterns. The evidence strongly suggests a coordinated scheme, though, of course, that's for investigators to determine. My phone vibrated. A message from a former colleague still at Triloon. All hell breaking loose here. Stephen locked in boardroom. Security at all exits. I continued my presentation, voice steady as my phone lit up with updates from the disaster unfolding 20 blocks south. By the time I reached the final slide, showing projected losses from Stephen's scheme at $4.7 million and counting. The lead SEC representative was already on his phone, speaking in the clipped tones of someone mobilizing resources. We'll need you to remain available, Margaret Chen said. There will be follow-up questions, many follow-up questions. Of course, though I should mention my employment at Triloon ends today. She almost smiled. I suspect that's no longer the case. The return to Triloon felt like entering a crime scene. Media vans clustered outside, security guards checking badges with unusual scrutiny, employees clustered in nervous groups. The elevator ride to 42 was the longest of my career. The boardroom doors were closed, but through the glass I could see the drama unfolding. Stephen stood at the center, no longer the polished executive, but a cornered animal. Board members sat in judgment, faces ranging from shocked to furious. The CEO looked like he'd aged 5 years and 5 hours. They'd called in outside counsel, forensic accountants, crisis management, but they'd also called in someone else. Through the chaos, the CEO spotted me, gesturing urgently. I entered the boardroom to absolute silence. Stephen's eyes found mine, and in them I saw the moment of recognition. He finally understood who'd destroyed him. "Ms. Evans," the board chairman said, "we understand you've been instrumental in uncovering certain irregularities." "I provided analysis to external auditors as requested," I replied. "They drew their own conclusions. Your analysis appears remarkably thorough for someone in transition." I met his gaze steadily. 15 years of experience provides certain insights. I take my fiduciary responsibilities seriously. Stephen found his voice. "This is a vendetta. She's bitter about the restructuring, manufacturing evidence." "The evidence speaks for itself," I interrupted, voice calm as January ice. "Every transaction is documented, every contract signed by your hand, every bonus traceable to specific accounts. You were remarkably thorough in your documentation, Mr. Rollins, almost as if you were proud of it." The SEC representatives entered then, badges visible, intentions clear. Stephen's attorney stepped forward, but the game was over, the numbers had spoken, and their testimony was damning. "Vanessa," the CEO said quietly, "we owe you an apology, and significantly more than that." "I don't need apologies," I said. "I need competent leadership that doesn't treat oversight as an enemy to be eliminated." The board chairman nodded slowly. "We'll be restructuring, properly this time. We'd like you to lead the financial analysis division. Full restoration of your team, 30% budget increase, direct reporting to the board." I considered the offer as Stephen was escorted out, his designer suit no armor against handcuffs. Through the windows, Manhattan stretched endless and glittering, a city built on numbers and the people who understood them. "I'll need complete autonomy," I said finally. "No interference, no politics, no budget cuts without board approval. Done. And I want Stephen's office, the corner one." A pause, then the chairman smiled grimly. "Also done." I stood to leave, pausing at the door. "Gentlemen, lady, you hired Stephen Rollins because he promised to cut costs and boost profits. He delivered, just not how you expected. Next time, perhaps remember that the people who watch your money are not costs to be cut. They're the only thing standing between you and the next Stephen Rollins." I left them to their crisis management, their lawyers, their reputation salvage. In the elevator, I pulled out my black ledger, running my finger down the list of names and anomalies I'd tracked over the years. Stephen's entry could be marked complete, but there were others. There always were in buildings like this, where money moved like water and greed grew like mold in the dark. But for today, justice had been served in the language I spoke, best numbers that refused to lie, evidence that demanded truth, and the patient revenge of someone who understood that in corporate America, the most dangerous enemy is the one you've underestimated. The New York Times ran the story on page 1 of the business section. Tri-Loon Capital CFO arrested in bonus scheme. The Wall Street Journal preferred hidden millions, how one analyst exposed corporate greed. My name appeared in neither, by design. The best victories are anonymous, leaving only consequences in their wake. Stephen Rollins was terminated with cause at 4:17 p.m., his golden parachute shredded by the morality clauses he'd never imagined would apply to him. The board issued statements about strengthening oversight and renewing their commitment to transparency. Tri-Loon's stock dipped 5%, then recovered as investors realized the cancer had been caught before metastasis. I spent my last official day at Tri-Loon in Stephen's former office, now mine, watching boxes being removed from down the hall. His personal effects, his awards, his carefully curated image of success, all of it worthless now, just props in a performance that had ended badly. The board chairman visited that afternoon, finding me at the window where Stephen once stood to intimidate subordinates. "The offer stands," he said. "We need someone like you, especially now." I turned from the view. Someone like me. Someone who sees patterns, who asks uncomfortable questions, who can't be bought or bullied into silence. That's a rare commodity in this building, Which is why we're prepared to make it worth your while. Name your price. I smiled. That expression I'd perfected over 15 years. My price isn't monetary. Then what? I handed him an envelope I'd prepared that morning. He opened it, scanning the single page inside, his expression shifting from curiosity to surprise. You're serious? Completely. He read it again, then looked at me with something approaching respect. This is unexpected. The expected got you Stephen Rollins. That evening, I cleared my office for the second time in a month, but this time, I was leaving on my own terms. The black ledger went into my briefcase, still half full of names and suspicious patterns. My laptop, wiped clean after transferring all evidence to appropriate authorities. The nameplate from my door. Vanessa Evans, Senior Financial Analyst. A title I'd earned and defended and finally outgrown. Security processed my exit with confusion. Word had spread that I'd been offered Stephen's position, a triumphant return from the ashes of his attempted purge. They couldn't understand why I was leaving anyway. Sometimes, I told the guard who'd watched me arrive at 6:30 a.m. for 15 years, the best revenge isn't taking your enemy's throne, it's showing them you never needed it. Outside, Manhattan evening swallowed me whole. Anonymous among millions. Just another suit heading home after another day moving money through the machine. But in boardrooms across the city, CFOs would read about Stephen Rollins and check their own schemes, wondering if someone like me was watching. In audit departments, analysts would find new authority to ask hard questions. In the shadows where corporate greed flourished, lights were being turned on. I took the subway home, standing room only, pressed between strangers who had no idea they were traveling with the woman who'd just toppled a multi-million-dollar fraud. My phone buzzed with messages. Job offers from firms that suddenly recognized the value of incorruptible oversight. Interview requests from journalists chasing the inside story. Congratulations from former colleagues who'd survived Stephen's purge. I deleted them all. In my apartment, I placed the black ledger in my safe, next to volumes from previous years. 15 years of patterns, crimes, victories, and defeats. A history of American corporate excess written in margins and transferred funds. Tomorrow, lawyers would call, investigators would have questions. The apparatus of justice would grind forward, slow but inexorable. But tonight, I poured a glass of wine and stood at my window, looking out at a city built on ambition and avarice in equal measure. Somewhere out there, another Stephen Rollins was scheming. Another company was being hollowed out. Another whistleblower was being silenced. Not my problem anymore. I'd played the game, won conclusively, and walked away before it consumed me. The resignation letter I'd given the chairman was clear, effective immediately. No negotiation, no counteroffer sufficient. After 15 years of watching the watchers, I was done. They'd find someone else to guard their money. Someone younger. Perhaps hungrier. Certainly less cynical. Someone who hadn't yet learned that in corporate America, the real crime isn't stealing, it's getting caught. Someone who still believed the system could be fixed from within. I raised my glass to the glittering skyline, to Stephen Rollins in his holding cell, to Triloon Capital scrambling to rebuild trust, to all the ghosts in all the machines generating wealth for those who already had too much. May you get exactly what you deserve, I toasted, then finished my wine and closed the curtains on that chapter of my life. The black ledger would remain in my safe, insurance against future needs, but Vanessa Evans, corporate avenger, guardian of fiscal propriety, was officially retired. I'd leave with the only currency that truly mattered in the end, the knowledge that when power tried to crush me, I'd crushed it instead, and somewhere in the city, in a building identical to thousands of others, another analyst was noticing patterns, asking questions, refusing to be silenced. The cycle would continue, with or without me. But I'd shown them how it was done. Sometimes, that's revenge enough. Thank you for listening to my story. I am curious to know where you are listening from, so please share your location in the comments below so we can connect. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and share your thoughts on corporate justice and whether you've ever witnessed similar situations in your workplace. Your stories and perspectives matter, and I'd love to hear them.